Okay, this video lecture is going to cover the major points of the scientific method. This is a process I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, having experienced it throughout junior high and elementary school. Scientific method is a way of approaching the world that allows us to answer questions in a step-by-step method so that we have confidence in the answers that we gather. For this covers learning target number 3 in the biology skills unit, and we're going to go through the major steps. You will be assessed on this, and then later in the trimester and throughout the year you will occasionally need to write papers using some of this background information. So, what I would like you to do is to find this notes sheet. You're going to be filling out this note sheet as you go. The first step of the scientific method, the first thing that scientists do, is make an observation. Now you'll notice that this is a wheel, so this can go anywhere. I've chosen to put make an observation in this part because the scientific method really is a cycle, and it actually can kind of begin or end almost anywhere in the cycle. But generally it begins with a scientist making an observation. Observations help us define problems and questions that need solutions, and the scientific method is the tool that scientists use to help us answer complex questions. So next to what an observation is, you will want to jot down some notes about what an observation is and how the scientific method helps us with that. So just to illustrate the point, I have an example here. Let's imagine you are looking at your yard and you notice this. Right? You have an observation. There's a problem here. Some patches of the yard are dead. They seem to be roughly circular. Sometimes the circles have joined together. And other parts of the grass look perfectly healthy. So there's a problem. And we need a way to answer the question of what is causing the grass to look this way. So that's making an observation. The first thing you do as part of the scientific method is create a problem statement. Problem statement is this. It's a question. It must be based on observations, so it must be testable. Okay. Now what does that mean to be testable? Basically a testable problem statement or a testable question is not a yes-no answer. So is the grass dying is not a question that is testable scientifically. We don't need that. We don't need the scientific method. Usually the scientific method answers questions that start with how or what. So here's an example in the scenario of what was observed. So you sort of have an idea of what might be causing those circular dead spots in your yard. In this case you have a dog and you suspect maybe it's where the dog is peeing or urinating. So what is the effect of dogs peeing on my grass growing? That's what the question you want to answer. Now you may feel like you know the answer. That's not uncommon. You've made an observation, you've created a problem statement. The next thing that you're going to do is identify the variables involved in the dead grass. The first variable involved is called the independent variable. It's the one that you manipulate. So if you were going to conduct an investigation to find out why the grass was dying, you would begin by listing the one thing that you think might have caused the observed dead patches of grass. And in this case, based upon your question, what is the effect of dog peeing, you're assuming or you're predicting, or maybe at this point I suppose you're not predicting, but you're wondering if it is the dog urination that causes these circles, and you want to find out whether it's that. So that's your independent variable. It's the thing you as the researcher are going to intentionally change or manipulate. And in this case, you're manipulating the fact that you're gonna have grass that has dog urine and grass that doesn't. You also need a dependent variable. This is the responding variable. And this is what happens as a result of your independent variable. And in this investigation, you're predicting that it's this dead grass that is the result of the independent variable, the result of dog urine. However, there's also often alternative explanations or alternative variables that might also cause the same thing that you observed. We call these controlled variables or alternative independent variables. The reason we use the word controlled variables is because these are other things that could cause the dead grass, and it's going to be necessary for you to control them so that you make sure that you only have one independent variable. So for instance, maybe watering could cause a patchiness like this. Maybe water landing in some areas and not in others might cause the grass to be dead in some areas and healthy in others. Or maybe there's a grub or a beetle that lives in the ground and starts in the center and eats its way out, and they're responsible for those circles. The only way you can tell whether it's the grub or the water or the thing you believe, the dog urinating, is by running an investigation that is controlled. Okay. So we've identified the variables. Once you've identified the variables, you need to write a hypothesis. The hypothesis is, the goal of the hypothesis is to answer the problem statement. It uses the independent and dependent variable. It's a prediction, usually stated as if I do this, then this will happen because. And it includes an explanation of why you believe that's going to happen. So in this case, a hypothesis in if, then, because format would be, if a dog urinates on grass, then the grass will turn brown because dog urine contains chemicals that may kill grass. So we have written a hypothesis. So for each of these, as you're filling this out, please make sure that you have written the step, and under the step you have written an explanation of what that means along the margins in your notes, somewhere that you can access the information. Then you design an experiment. An experiment is a procedure, it's a set of instructions, and it must be repeatable so that other scientists can repeat your research and confirm the results that you end up getting. So in this case, because it's grass, you would have an experimental design where you controlled all the variables by growing the grass in a very controlled way so that you were sure that it was getting a controlled amount of water, so that you were sure there weren't grubs, so that you were sure there weren't some of the other things you think might cause the brown grass. And then you can add urine or not to some of these grass trays and see how it affects their growth. So we've designed an experiment. Then we collect data. Remember, data is the dependent variable. Data is what you are measuring. In this case, grass growth. Data comes in two varieties. I really should indent these because these are types of data. There's qualitative data, which is descriptions, and there's quantitative data, like a quantity, which are numbers. The data is then organized into a data table that quickly communicates the information that you have collected. And here's a picture, an example of a data table that is not about grass growth, but you get the idea. You have the data organized in a nice, convenient way. Okay, so we've collected the data, then the data needs to be analyzed. It can be analyzed using graphs that show trends, or you may complete some kind of mathematical calculation to compare data. You get percents and averages. After you've analyzed the data, the last step is to draw a conclusion or write a conclusion. The main goal of the conclusion is to answer your question. Since the scientific method is about answering questions, you better answer your question in the conclusion. You should describe whether the data supported or rejected your hypothesis. It does not matter whether it supports or rejects your hypothesis, but you should explain whether it supports or rejects your hypothesis. And then usually while you're doing the investigation, you will make some other observations. Particularly if you reject your hypothesis, you should have another question. The next question would be, well, if it's not the urine, then is it the water? If it's not the urine, is it the grubs? You propose future research or future questions that relate somehow to what you have just learned. If you do learn that it's the urine, perhaps you propose research to learn how the concentration of the urine, how much urine causes the pattern of grass death that you saw, or if the urine is deleted or diluted, so it's less concentrated, does it still cause the same pattern? So, a proposed future research. And that's it. You have the whole cycle. And it is a cycle because when you're done, you are already thinking about what your next question is. And you go on, that conclusion becomes your new observation. You can create a new problem statement, identify variables, and go through this cycle again and again. Or another scientist may complete the cycle again using the research that you have done. So these are the steps in the scientific method. You'll be expected to know the individual steps and the order that they occur in, as well as an explanation of what happens in each step.